When we talk about empaths with very few friends, the first quality that quietly shapes everything else is a heightened form of emotional intelligence, one that operates both inwardly and outwardly at the same time. This isn't the kind of emotional awareness that shows up as constant sensitivity or emotional display. It's subtler, more disciplined, and far more demanding. These individuals are not simply reacting to emotions, they are continuously reading them, interpreting them, and managing their impact. On the inward side, this means an unusually refined awareness of their own emotional states. They notice shifts in mood early, often before those feelings become overwhelming or disruptive. They recognize when frustration is turning into resentment, when empathy is drifting toward exhaustion, when engagement is becoming obligation. This kind of self-monitoring is not accidental. It develops over time as a survival skill, especially for people who feel deeply and absorb emotional information from their environment with little filtering. Without this awareness, emotional overload would be inevitable. But emotional intelligence, as Daniel Goleman has long emphasized, is not just about awareness. It's about regulation. Empaths with few friends learn how to manage their internal responses so they are not constantly driven by them. They pause before reacting. They choose distance when closeness would cost too much. They withdraw not out of fear or superiority, but out of emotional responsibility. They understand that every interaction has a psychological price, and they are careful about what they spend. Outwardly, this intelligence becomes even more visible. These individuals are often highly attuned to the emotional undercurrents in a room, the tension no one names, the discomfort masked by politeness, the subtle shifts in tone that reveal what words conceal. They can sense when someone is emotionally dysregulated, even when that person appears composed. They notice incongruence between what is said and what is felt. This makes casual or superficial interaction surprisingly taxing. When you are constantly processing this level of information, social environments become dense, not light. This is one of the reasons their social circles remain small. It's not that they lack social skill, quite the opposite. They often possess a level of emotional perception that makes many interactions feel inefficient or misaligned. Small talk feels empty. Performative connection feels dishonest. Emotional inconsistency feels unsettling. Over time, they learn that fewer relationships, chosen carefully, allow for greater authenticity and sustainability. There is also a strong ethical dimension here. High emotional intelligence brings with it a heightened sense of responsibility. When you can accurately read others' emotions, you also become aware of how your words, presence, and decisions affect them. Empaths with few friends often hesitate to engage casually because they know engagement is never neutral. Attention implies care. Listening implies responsibility. They do not want to offer either lightly. This creates a quiet paradox. From the outside, their limited social life may look like detachment. From the inside, it is the result of deep engagement with emotional reality. They are not avoiding connection, they are honoring it. They are choosing depth over frequency, clarity over comfort, meaning over momentum. And this is where their intelligence becomes rare. In a culture that rewards visibility and constant interaction, the ability to step back, regulate emotion, and choose relationships intentionally is a form of quiet mastery. It reflects not emotional fragility, but emotional strength. The closing insight is simple, but demanding emotional intelligence is not measured by how many people you can connect with, but by how consciously you choose to connect at all. Building on that inner and outer emotional awareness, the next rare form of intelligence often found in empaths with very few friends is a deep, intuitive social intelligence, one that does not depend on constant interaction or broad social exposure. In fact, it often develops precisely because these individuals spend less time immersed in social noise and more time observing social reality from a slight distance. Social intelligence is commonly misunderstood as charm, fluency, or the ability to work a room. But in its more mature form, it's about understanding how people relate, how groups function, and how unspoken rules shape behavior. Empaths with small social circles tend to excel here not because they are always participating, but because they are paying attention. They notice who speaks and who stays silent, whose emotions steer the group, whose approval people seek, and whose discomfort goes unacknowledged. These patterns become visible when you are not preoccupied with performing. This observational stance gives them a strong grasp of social dynamics without requiring constant social immersion. They understand power, influence, belonging, and exclusion at a level that feels almost instinctive. They can often predict how a conversation will unfold or how a group will respond long before it happens, not because they are cynical, but because they are attentive to emotional cause and effect. Over time, this awareness makes excessive social exposure feel redundant. Once you've seen the pattern, repeating it adds little new information. There is also a protective function at work. High social intelligence means recognizing not only connection, but manipulation, emotional inconsistency, and misalignment of values. Empaths with few friends tend to spot these early. They notice when friendliness masks competition, when humor deflects accountability, when consensus is maintained at the cost of honesty. This doesn't make them judgmental, but it does make them selective. They are less willing to stay in environments where authenticity is sacrificed for harmony. Importantly, this selectivity is not antisocial. These individuals often perform well in professional or structured social settings. They can collaborate, communicate clearly, and lead when necessary. What they avoid is social saturation, the idea that more interaction automatically leads to better connection. Their intelligence tells them otherwise. They understand that emotional bandwidth is finite, and that spreading it too thin leads to superficial bonds and internal depletion. Another subtle aspect of this intelligence is their sensitivity to social pacing. They know when to speak and when to pause, when to engage and when to withdraw. Silence for them is not absence. It's information. They understand that relationships deepen not through constant exchange, but through well-timed presence. This often makes their interactions feel unusually meaningful to others, even if they are brief or infrequent. Paradoxically, this can create distance because they don't rely on frequent contact or social validation. They may appear reserved or hard to read, but beneath that reserve is a refined understanding of human behavior. They are often the ones others turn to in moments of conflict or confusion, not because they are always around, but because when they are present, they see clearly. Philosophically, this kind of social intelligence reflects a shift from participation to discernment. It values quality of interaction over quantity of exposure. It recognizes that not every social space deserves access to one's inner life. In a culture that equates openness with health and busyness with belonging, this discernment can look like withdrawal. In reality, it is a form of wisdom. Empaths with few friends often learn this through experience. Early on, many of them try to be more socially available, more accommodating, more connected. Over time, they notice the cost: emotional fatigue, blurred boundaries, a sense of being known superficially but not understood. Social intelligence matures when they begin to ask a different question. Not how do I fit in, but where do I belong and at what cost? This question reshapes everything. Friendships become fewer but more aligned. Conversations become less frequent but more honest. Social life becomes less about stimulation and more about coherence. They stop chasing connection and start cultivating it. And doing so, they often become models of relational integrity, even if they never set out to be. What's important to understand is that this form of intelligence is not passive. It requires constant calibration, Reading social environments accurately means continually updating one's understanding of people, contexts, and emotional climates. It means resisting the urge to over-explain, overshare, or overextend. It means trusting perception, even when it leads to solitude. And solitude, in this case, is not a failure of social intelligence. It is one of its outcomes. When you understand social systems deeply, you no longer need to be immersed in them to feel secure. You can step in when it matters and step back when it doesn't. You can remain connected without being consumed. This is why empaths with very few friends often carry a quiet confidence. They are not dependent on constant affirmation. Their sense of belonging is internally anchored. They know how groups work, but they are not defined by them. They can navigate social worlds without losing themselves inside them. The closing reflection is this: true social intelligence is not proven by how visible you are, but by how wisely you choose where and with whom to invest your presence. As social intelligence becomes more discerning and emotional awareness more regulated, another form of intelligence begins to stand out, one that is less visible to others, but deeply influential in shaping a person's life. This is intrapersonal intelligence, the capacity to understand oneself with clarity, honesty, and psychological depth. For empaths with very few friends, this inner intelligence is not an abstract concept. It is a daily practice. Intrapersonal intelligence begins with self-awareness, but not the kind that stops at naming emotions. It goes further into understanding patterns. These individuals don't just recognize that they feel overwhelmed or withdrawn, they know why. They can trace emotional reactions back to values being violated, boundaries being crossed, or energy being depleted. Over time, this ability to connect inner experience with outer cause becomes a form of internal navigation. It allows them to make choices that are aligned rather than reactive. This level of self-understanding often develops early, sometimes out of necessity. Highly empathic people tend to encounter emotional overload sooner than others. They feel the impact of environments, relationships, and expectations more intensely. Without reflection, this can lead to confusion or self-blame. With reflection, it becomes insight. Many empaths learn to turn inward not as an escape, but as a way to regain equilibrium and meaning. Solitude plays a central role here, but it is important to clarify what that solitude represents. It is not loneliness, and it is not isolation driven by fear. It is chosen space. Time alone becomes a laboratory for understanding the self. In these moments, thoughts settle, emotions clarify, and internal contradictions become visible. Intrapersonal intelligence grows when a person can sit with discomfort long enough to learn from it, rather than immediately distracting themselves or seeking validation. This is where philosophical depth enters the picture. Empaths with strong intrapersonal intelligence tend to ask fundamental questions about their lives. Why do certain relationships drain me? What kind of work aligns with my values? Where am I compromising myself for acceptance? These are not questions that yield quick answers, but they shape long-term direction. They help a person live deliberately rather than by default. This inner clarity often leads to difficult choices. When you understand yourself deeply, you become less willing to participate in situations that conflict with your values or emotional limits. You may step away from relationships that others would tolerate. You may decline opportunities that look impressive but feel misaligned. From the outside, these decisions can appear puzzling or even self-limiting. From the inside, they feel necessary. One of the less discussed aspects of intrapersonal intelligence is emotional accountability. These individuals take responsibility for their inner states without projecting them onto others. They recognize the difference between feeling hurt and being harmed, between discomfort and injustice. This distinction allows them to respond thoughtfully rather than defensively. It also reduces the need for constant reassurance because their self-worth is not outsourced. This doesn't mean they are immune to self-doubt. On the contrary, high intrapersonal intelligence often brings a sharper awareness of one's limitations and inconsistencies. But instead of collapsing under that awareness, empaths with this intelligence use it to refine themselves. They see growth as an ongoing process, not a destination. Self-knowledge becomes a tool for evolution, not self-criticism. There is also a creative dimension to this intelligence. Many empaths with few friends channel their inner understanding into writing, art, problem solving, or quiet leadership. Because they spend time observing their inner world, they develop a rich internal landscape. This depth often translates into original thinking and nuanced expression. Their ideas may not be loud, but they tend to be well-formed and meaningful. In a psychological sense, intrapersonal intelligence provides resilience. When external validation is limited or inconsistent, a strong inner framework becomes essential. These individuals know who they are even when no one is watching or affirming them. That stability allows them to withstand social pressure and cultural noise. It also makes their connections more authentic when they do occur, because they are not seeking to be completed by others. Culturally, this kind of intelligence is undervalued. We often celebrate extroversion, speed, and constant engagement, while overlooking the quiet discipline of self-reflection. Yet many of the most ethical, creative, and grounded individuals develop precisely because they have learned to listen inwardly. Empaths with few friends often embody this countercultural strength. Importantly, intrapersonal intelligence does not isolate them from others emotionally. Instead, it allows for cleaner connection. When you know yourself well, you bring less confusion, projection, and unmet expectation into relationships. You can meet others as they are without asking them to fill gaps you haven't acknowledged in yourself. This intelligence also brings a sense of meaning that is not dependent on social status. Purpose becomes something internal, shaped by values and contribution rather than comparison. Life feels coherent even when it is quiet. And in that quiet, these individuals often find a sense of peace that is difficult to achieve through external achievement alone. The closing reflection here is this: when you learn to understand yourself deeply, solitude stops being empty space and becomes the foundation for a life lived with clarity, integrity, and intention. As self-understanding deepens and social awareness becomes more selective, another rare form of intelligence begins to guide the choices of empaths with very few friends, a strong moral and ethical intelligence. This is not about rigid rules or moral superiority. It is about an internal compass that consistently weighs the human impact of decisions, often long before external consequences appear. Empaths tend to experience ethics not as abstract principles, but as felt realities. They sense when something is unfair, when someone is being quietly harmed, or when integrity is being compromised for convenience. This sensitivity makes moral reasoning less theoretical and more experiential. When values are violated, they don't just notice it. They feel the psychological cost of that violation in their own nervous system. Over time, this creates a heightened awareness of alignment. Empaths with ethical intelligence pay close attention to whether their actions match their values. Incongruence creates discomfort, sometimes even distress. Saying yes when they mean no, staying silent when honesty is required, or participating in systems they believe are harmful can feel internally destabilizing. As a result, they often choose fewer relationships and environments, not because they are inflexible, but because they are internally consistent. This moral consistency can be challenging in social contexts. Many social systems rely on unspoken agreements to overlook certain behaviors for the sake of harmony or advancement. Ethical intelligence disrupts this. Empaths often notice when kindness is conditional, when success is built on exclusion, or when power is exercised without accountability. They may struggle in environments where moral compromise is normalized, not because they lack adaptability, but because adaptation would require self-betrayal. Importantly, ethical intelligence does not mean constant confrontation. Many empaths are deeply aware of timing, context, and emotional readiness. They understand that truth delivered without care can become another form of harm. Their ethical reasoning often includes empathy for human limitation. This is why they may choose quiet withdrawal over public challenge. Silence, in this case, is not agreement. It is a boundary. This intelligence also shapes how they judge others. Empaths with moral intelligence tend to resist simplistic moral binaries. They understand that people are shaped by fear, trauma, and context. Accountability for them does not require dehumanization. They can hold complexity without excusing harm. This nuanced moral stance often leaves them feeling out of place in polarized or emotionally reactive environments. One consequence of this intelligence is a heightened sense of responsibility. When you can clearly see the emotional ripple effects of actions, it becomes harder to act carelessly. Empaths often feel responsible not only for what they do, but for how they do it. Tone, intention, and impact matter. This level of care can be exhausting, but it also fosters trust. People may not always understand these individuals, but they often sense their integrity. Ethical intelligence also influences how empaths define success. Rather than prioritizing status, wealth, or recognition, they are more likely to measure success by contribution and coherence. Does my work reduce harm? Does it respect dignity? Does it align with who I am? These questions guide decisions in ways that may limit social or professional expansion, but they deepen personal fulfillment. Psychologically, this intelligence provides stability. When external feedback is inconsistent or critical, a strong ethical framework offers internal validation. These individuals know why they made a choice, even if it is misunderstood. That clarity reduces regret and resentment. It also allows them to stand alone when necessary without collapsing into doubt. There is also a quiet courage embedded in this form of intelligence. Choosing integrity over belonging is not easy. It often leads to fewer allies and slower progress. Empaths with moral intelligence accept this cost consciously. They understand that belonging gained through self-compromise is fragile and unsustainable. Real connection, they believe, requires ethical congruence. In a broader philosophical sense, this intelligence reflects a commitment to human dignity. It resists treating people as means to an end. It values presence over performance, care over control. In societies that reward efficiency and dominance, this stance can seem impractical. Yet it is often these individuals who create cultures of trust in small but meaningful ways. Their influence may not be loud or widespread, but it is durable. Ethical intelligence tends to ripple outward through example rather than persuasion. Others notice how these individuals listen, how they speak when it matters, how they refuse to participate in harm, even when it would be easier to do so. Over time, this consistency earns respect, even from those who disagree. The closing reflection here is this: when your moral compass is clear, you may walk with fewer people, but every step you take will be in the right direction. As moral clarity becomes more integrated and emotional awareness more refined, we arrive at a particularly rare and powerful form of intelligence, one that distinguishes deep empathy from mere sensitivity. This is the integration of empathic feeling with cognitive understanding. In other words, the ability not only to feel what others feel, but to think clearly about those feelings, place them in context, and translate them into wise action. Many people experience empathy as an emotional reflex. They feel another's pain and become overwhelmed, reactive, or drained. Empaths with this integrated intelligence move differently. They experience emotional resonance, but they do not lose their cognitive footing. They can step back, analyze what they are sensing, and ask important questions. Is this emotion mine or someone else's? What is being communicated beneath the surface? What response would help rather than soothe me temporarily? This distinction is crucial. Without cognitive integration, empathy can become emotional contagion. With it, empathy becomes insight. These individuals learn to hold emotion and reason simultaneously, allowing one to inform the other without domination. This balance takes time to develop and is often born from trial and error. Many empaths learn the hard way that feeling everything without understanding it leads to burnout. Integration is how they protect both their compassion and their clarity. Psychologically, this intelligence reflects advanced emotional processing. These individuals can tolerate emotional complexity without simplifying it. They recognize mixed motives, ambivalence, and contradiction in others and in themselves. They don't rush to resolve discomfort by assigning blame or forcing closure. Instead, they allow meaning to emerge gradually. This patience gives their responses a grounded quality that others often find stabilizing. This integration also changes how they listen. They hear not just words, but emotional subtext. At the same time, they are aware of cognitive biases, projection, assumption, emotional distortion. They question their interpretations rather than treating them as fact. This humility keeps their empathy accurate rather than intrusive. It also reduces the likelihood of emotional overreach, where helping becomes controlling or self-sacrificial. In relationships, this intelligence allows for deep connection without enmeshment. Empaths with cognitive integration can care without rescuing, understand without absorbing, and support without disappearing. They know that feeling someone's pain does not obligate them to fix it. Sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes boundaries are the most compassionate response. Knowing the difference is a mark of wisdom. This intelligence also plays a role in conflict. When emotions run high, many people either shut down or escalate. Integrated empaths can remain emotionally present while thinking clearly. They see and acknowledge feelings without being driven by them. This makes them effective mediators, counselors, and leaders, even if they never occupy those roles formally. Their ability to translate emotion into understanding creates space for resolution rather than reactivity. Philosophically, this form of intelligence bridges the traditional divide between heart and mind. It challenges the assumption that rationality requires emotional distance or that compassion requires self-loss. Instead, it suggests that true intelligence emerges when emotion and cognition are in dialogue. Empaths with few friends often live in this dialogue daily. Their inner lives are not chaotic, they are layered. One reason their social circles remain small is that this level of integration is rare and often unreciprocated. Deep, thoughtful empathy can feel out of place in environments that reward speed, certainty, or emotional simplification. These individuals may feel misunderstood, not because others lack empathy, but because others have not integrated it cognitively. Over time, they learn to conserve this depth for relationships that can hold it. This intelligence also influences how they process their own experiences. Rather than being swept away by emotion, they reflect on it. They ask what a feeling is teaching them, what value it points to, what action it invites. This reflective stance transforms emotion from a disruptive force into a source of information. Pain becomes data. Joy becomes guidance. Confusion becomes a signal to slow down rather than rush forward. There is a quiet leadership in this way of being. Empaths with cognitive integration often help others make sense of their own ions, not by giving advice, but by clarifying meaning. They name what others feel but cannot articulate. They connect dots that others sense but cannot explain. This skill is not learned from textbooks. It is cultivated through lived experience and disciplined reflection. Culturally, this intelligence is underdeveloped and undervalued. We tend to polarize emotion and intellect, asking people to choose between being kind or being competent, sensitive or strong. Integrated empaths embody a different model. They demonstrate that emotional depth and intellectual rigor can coexist, and that together they produce better decisions. Ultimately, this intelligence protects empathy from becoming self-destructive. It allows compassion to endure rather than burn out. It enables these individuals to remain open without being porous, caring without collapsing, and present without being consumed. The closing reflection is this: when empathy is guided by understanding, it becomes not a burden to carry, but a force that quietly reshapes how we think, act, and lead. As all these forms of intelligence converge, emotional regulation, social discernment, self-knowledge, moral clarity, and empathic understanding, one final intelligence quietly emerges. It is less about interaction and more about orientation, less about managing relationships, and more about understanding why those relationships matter at all. This is existential, meaning-based intelligence, the capacity to reflect on purpose, value, and the deeper patterns that give a life coherence. Empaths with very few friends often develop this intelligence not through abstract philosophy, but through lived experience. When social ion is limited, attention turns inward and outward in different ways. Instead of asking, "How do I fit in?" the question becomes, "What is worth my time, my energy, my care?" This shift may seem subtle, but it reshapes everything, from how relationships are chosen to how work is defined to how success is measured. Meaning-based intelligence is fueled by reflection. These individuals tend to think in terms of narratives rather than moments. They notice how choices accumulate, how values shape trajectories, how small compromises echo over time. This long-view thinking makes them less reactive to trends and less dependent on external approval. They are guided by an internal sense of direction that does not require constant reinforcement. Psychologically, this intelligence provides grounding. When identity is rooted in meaning rather than role or status, it becomes more stable. Empaths with few friends often know who they are even when circumstances change. They may lose a relationship, a job, or a social identity without losing their sense of self. Their worth is not anchored in belonging, but in alignment with purpose. This intelligence also reframes solitude. Being alone is no longer a deficit to be corrected. It becomes a space for integration. In solitude, these individuals reflect on what matters, what endures, and what can be released they are comfortable with. Silence, because silence allows meaning to surface. In a culture that equates noise with relevance, this comfort is rare. There is also a spiritual dimension here, though not necessarily a religious one. Empaths with existential intelligence often feel connected to something larger than themselves, humanity, truth, or the unfolding of life itself. This sense of connection reduces the pressure to extract fulfillment from a small group of people. Relationships become expressions of meaning rather than its source. This intelligence influences how they engage with suffering. Because they think in terms of meaning, pain is not only something to avoid or fix, it is also something to understand. They ask what suffering reveals about values, resilience, and compassion. This does not romanticize hardship, but does allow growth to emerge from it. Their empathy is deepened by the recognition that struggle is a shared human condition. Existential intelligence also shapes contribution. Rather than seeking impact through visibility, these individuals often focus on depth. They ask, how can I make a difference that is true, not just impressive? This might show up as mentoring, creating thoughtful work, or quietly supporting others in moments that matter. Their contributions may be small in scale, but large in significance. Philosophically, this intelligence challenges the assumption that a meaningful life must be socially expansive. It suggests instead that meaning arises from coherence between values, actions, and attention. Empaths with few friends often live in this coherence. Their lives may look simple from the outside, but internally they are rich with purpose. This orientation also brings acceptance of impermanence. Relationships change, roles evolve, and life unfolds unpredictably. Meaning-based intelligence allows individuals to hold this uncertainty without panic. They trust that purpose is not lost when forms change. This trust creates emotional resilience and quiet confidence. As a result, these individuals often age well psychologically. Their sense of fulfillment deepens rather than diminishes over time. They are less haunted by comparison and more engaged with contribution. They do not measure life by accumulation, but by resonance, what felt true, what mattered, what aligned. In the end, existential intelligence integrates all the others. Emotional intelligence helps manage feeling. Social intelligence guides connection. Intrapersonal intelligence clarifies self. Moral intelligence ensures integrity. Empathic cognitive integration brings wisdom. Meaning-based intelligence answers the final question, what is all of this for? The closing reflection is this: when you live from meaning rather than momentum, you may walk with fewer people, but every step carries purpose, and every choice becomes an act of intention.